So, good afternoon and welcome to this week's vlog. And today I've spent the last week looking at a book called Atomic Habits, and I found it kind of really interesting in breaking down how you kind of change behaviours in people by making very small changes. And I was kind of then thinking about the world in which, we live now, where big changes in systems seem to happen on an ongoing basis and all the time, and was therefore kind of wondering why you might kind of choose to make those big changes as opposed to these smaller changes which may deliver better results. And I kind of came thinking about this from the perspective of looking at the Dales Brailsford example with British cycling. And if you break that down, he basically spent time, and I couldn't remember the last time before Dave Brailsford was in charge of British cycling where a kind of British person had won a gold medal at the Olympics. I've got Chris Boardman in my head, and I'm relatively sure any number of people out there will prove me would suggest that wasn't the last one. But if you look at it, Dave Brailsford came into in charge in the early 2000s, and then set about, and as a cyclist himself, set about looking at every single aspect of how how changes were made, or how the individual components of a cycle were, in a race were put together, and he set about improving them all individually. So 1% here, 1% there, 1% elsewhere, and all of those changes added up to winning 7 of the 10 gold medals that they entered in the Beijing Olympics, and then equaling that in 2012 at the London Olympics. Couple that with the fact that also won a number of Tour de France's with both Chris Froome and Bradley Wiggins, and you see how that process came about. So I kind of came on to the question of why then do organisations not invest in making these small changes and kind of infinite improvement cycles, and focus on making those big changes. So thought I'd look at a couple of things today. Why you might choose a big bang approach. Obviously, I've talked a lot about the smaller approach, making marginal gains, but people must choose these for a reason. The second then is to look at the benefits of marginal gains, and then offer some kind of thinking that I had on it. So from a big bang perspective, I guess one of the key things on this is there is a high risk when you make a big change, but there are also very big rewards. If you swap out a system and put in a new one, you will get, if it goes well, you will get a huge scale of rewards with it. I kind of can't help but think this is related to shareholder value, and where you're proving that swapping one big thing for another makes an impact to that, and an impact on those people who get paid at the top level. So I can't help but kind of can put those two together, but can also understand where when you need, when you've brought organisations together, or where you're trying to demonstrate the value of change to an organisation, making a big chunky change is often a better way to do it. Second reason why you might choose a big bang approach is on cultural shift, and the concept that organisations, particularly ones that are being bought together through merger, acquisition, or something like that, they've got separate and different cultures, and obviously bringing those cultures together, getting people to operate in a new way, is often critical to making the savings or the exponential growth that those organisations require. So in those cases, perhaps a big bang is probably the only way to go about it. There are a few other reasons, but I guess the last one I kind of wanted to mention here is around urgency. And that context that if an organisation's financially distressed, or there's something not quite right in that organisation, they may need to either adopt a different leadership style, which generally brings a change in strategy, and a fairly drastic one, or a change of different positioning in the market, or something like that. So urgency can quite often lead to big change and kind of bring those about. So looking at that, and then kind of spinning it round and going, okay, then, so what are the benefits of those marginal gains, and how do you go about it? And I guess the first and kind of major one is that reduction of risk. Small changes, small investment, small improvement. If you get something wrong, it's not a major impact. And again, I can't help but think that, you know, people who represent at board level and at the levels where they're looking at it from a perspective of recognising the shareholder value, it will tend to focus on those big changes. But actually, through the demonstration of small changes, I do wonder, and the fact that you won't ever lose as much, there is often a much better way of doing this. The second is around the continuous improvement model, and obviously looking at the Toyota Kaizen model, which obviously has everyone in the organisation involved in recommending and making changes, and then kind of driving those changes through on an ongoing basis. I guess the fundamentals of this is it forces you to be open with people, but also makes you listen to the people that are working in the organisation, and trusting that those people will often be the ones who have the best idea how the organisation works. So there's two things that come from that. One is you get lots of recommendations on what you need to do, but the second is you actually engage with the organisation and talk to them. And I guess the last one is where you're making a big change, some people will often see the goals at the end of it as being impossible. So therefore aiming for small changes often kind of brings about a different approach. And I see this all the time as a cycler. I will quite often set out on a long cycle, but you know what it's like. You're sitting there, perhaps if I'm on an indoor bike, perhaps the podcast you were listening to is finished, and you're kind of getting a bit bored. So what I tend then to do is chunk down that into much smaller pieces. Now, this is obviously something that can be done with big changes, but the smaller changes just allow you to deliver in those smaller chunks. And what I often find with the cycling is you get to the end of that chunk, and then you move on to another similar size chunk, and actually you can break it down much more easily, and you believe you can achieve it with the smaller marginal gain approach. Okay, so that's the kind of upsides, or why you might choose to kind of make the big change, and also some of the benefits of the marginal gains. So I guess now just a bit of a kind of few points from me that I would draw from this. I guess I find myself drawing the conclusion that unless you've got a critical reason to do it, small changes continuously delivered will always lead to better organisational growth, better organisational cohesiveness, and a lot better ways of working. So I guess the question would be then, why would you choose big changes? And I can't help but I keep going back to this, that shareholder value and short-term strategies might be the reason for doing this. So when you focus on a short-term rather than a long-term strategy, and by long-term I mean a minimum of 5 years, if you focus on a short-term 1 to 3 year strategy, quite often the only way you can recognise results from it is big changes. So small changes don't represent what you need to deliver in that organisation. So I think there's a real kind of cohesiveness with the short-term objectives of boards in a lot of cases. Another factor here is that big change it may mean you don't actually invest in understanding your organisation. So by that I mean if you go in, and this particularly where organisations are merging together, because we'd have to invest millions of pounds in understanding why this system works here or this system works here, what we're going to do instead is drive through a new system that will bring all these things together. So my argument would be that in quite a lot of cases you don't necessarily understand the organisation when you're making these large scale changes. I would then lead that on to the question of, does that mean those changes will work for the organisation, or does it mean that you end up with something that goes in that doesn't necessarily meet the requirements of either of the organisations that it came from? So as you can see here, I'm kind of really pointing that the smaller changes driven, cohesively is the better way to do it. But I guess I would make one final point in concluding here. You need to invest in those in those small changes. It needs a consistent long-term investment and needs to be done in such a way that you're really driving the organisation forwards and that you're committed to this as a plan. In the same way as I believe business plans need to 5 years and you need 5-year objectives in an organisation, you also need, if you're committing to a programme of continuous improvement, it will require significant investment over a long period of time, and you will see the growth that comes from that. Thanks very much for listening today. I hope you found this interesting. As always, I'm really interested to hear any questions. Also, would ask people who want to hear more to click subscribe. And please let me know what your thoughts and feelings are on this idea that organisations going through Big Bang Theory or marginal gains, and whether they're capable of succeeding in the world. Thanks very much, and speak to you again next week.